Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 23rd of March of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the United States of America, because lots of very interesting updates and statements are coming from this territory. The United States expects tangible progress from tomorrow's talks with Russia and Saudi Arabia, especially on the issue of ceasefire on ships in the Black Sea, Witkoff said, and from this a complete ceasefire naturally follows. I'll remind you that tomorrow on the 24th of March of 2025 the talks are going to take place between the United States of America and the Russian Federation, and according to information we have, the Ukrainians will send a list through Americans to the Russians. They will provide the Russians a number of energy facilities, objects of energy facilities that Ukrainians don't want the Russians to attack. This is a very important list because we expect that the Russians will provide the same list to Ukrainians. You know that it's very difficult and hard to believe that this ceasefire in the Black Sea is going to work, because the parties still haven't found a solution how to finish or how to complete or how to follow a ceasefire on the energy facilities objects. For example, if you remember, several days ago both the Russians and the Ukrainians and the United States of America agreed to stop any attacks on energy facilities objects, but later the Ukrainians, while retreating from the Sumy direction, destroyed the gas transportation system in Sumy area, very important gas transportation system, and this is one of the objects of the energy facilities. And according to the Russians, now they need up to 2.5 years to repair this station, which means that for the next 2.5 years neither the Ukrainians nor the European countries are able to get gas through this area and through this infrastructure. And most likely the Russians will respond to this attack, as for now most likely the Russians are searching and seeking for a target to destroy, and most likely in the very near future we're going to find how exactly the Russians are planning to carry out retaliatory strike. Now let's continue with the United States of America. We have several more important statements made by the US authorities. White House aims to reach ceasefire agreement between Russia and Ukraine by April 20, so it's less than in a month. Obviously and very likely, unlikely the parties are able to complete the clashes along the line of combat contact before this date. For example, today the Kremlin made their own statements regarding the deadline that was established by the United States of America. The White House is confident that the conflict in Ukraine will end on April 20. Don't be fooled, there is a very serious painstaking work ahead. You will have to delve into the details. There are nuances, there are questions that Russia and the US will have to find answer to together. There are very complex substances and there is a lot of work to be done. We are only at the beginning of this path, the Kremlin representative noted, speaking about the prospects for a settlement. So the Russians are trying to tell us that 20th of April is a very good date, but most likely nobody will be able to finish this war exactly before these timings. Another important statement made by Witkoff: the US acknowledges that 5 despite regions are Russian speaking and want to be Russian, but Zelensky might not survive it politically. The US moves towards the Russian position. So according to Witkoff, there are 5 regions in the former Ukraine that want to stay as a part of the Russian Federation. We're talking about DPR, LPR, Zaporozhye, Kherson and Crimea regions. And I'll remind you that according to information we have, the Russians also raised one demand, one request to the United States of America. If they don't recognize these, let's say, regions as a part of the Russian Federation in the very near future, then most likely the Russians will put additional claims on other regions of Ukraine like Dnipro, Kharkiv, Nikolaev, Kherson and Odessa regions, and this is going to be completely different story. Anyway, the situation, we see that the situation between the Russians and the Americans are getting better, the relations were taken about. And another important thing, that new ambassador to the US, Alexander Darchiev, is heading to Washington next week, Russian Foreign Ministry. When talking about the relations between Russia and the United States of America, we see that everything is more or less okay. And we understand that this is the situation that is not okay with other countries, and for example with the United Kingdom. Keir Starmer on Putin, Trump and Europe's challenge. We've known this moment was coming. The British Prime Minister said in a series of conversations that the tectonic shifts in America's relationship with Europe and Russia had to be galvanized moment. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has called on European countries to develop a plan in advance to ensure security and contain Russia. In the event of a peace deal between Moscow and Kiev, he said this is an interview with the New York Times. We can't sit and wait for a deal and then when it happens agree and stretch our heads, he said. So that is why we believe that most likely in the very near future we're going to see several provocations from the European countries, from London, from Paris, from Ukraine, from Kiev, with the purpose to break the talks between Russia and the United States of America. And then it will be very interesting to see whether the Russians and the Americans will be caught by these provocations and will ruin the negotiation process by themselves. Now let's go to Ukraine and let's discuss the most important updates. And first let's continue with Kiev. As we discussed in the previous video, the fourth day in a row the Russians attacked the territory of Ukraine with a significant number of drones. We have a lot of videos, lots of explosions all over the entire territory of Ukraine. Several days ago we saw explosions on the territory of the city of Odessa, then we saw explosions in the Zaporozhye city, and now we see lots of explosions on the territory of the city of Kiev. All these videos that you can see right now in front of your screen took place the previous night, and this morning we got another video, but this time during the daylight. And this video shows the consequences of Russian attack with the use of Geraint drone. A very huge warehouse was destroyed. The source reported that Ukrainians were using this warehouse as the ammunition depot, and we see that the Russians managed to destroy it as a result of drone attack. So it's very interesting to see what is going to happen this upcoming night, because we believe that the Russians will continue. It is very important to show to the Ukrainians that the Russians have much more stronger negotiation position, and if you don't accept the terms and the demands of the Russian side tomorrow in the Saudi Arabia, this strike will just intensify. Today, the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense published some statistics regarding the work of their air defense, and as you can see, according to information we have, the Ukrainians during the previous night managed to bring down just 97 drones of 147, so which means that 50 drones managed to reach the target and to deal significant damage to the armed forces of Ukraine, to their warehouses and to everything from the military facilities and infrastructure. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and first let's talk about the Suja direction, or the Sumy direction already. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. First of all, the Russians established or entered the village of Volodymyrovka. As for now we don't have proofs, we don't have geolocations that can confirm this. The only thing we have is several reports published by neutral and pro-Russian mappers, and according to information we have, the Russians entered the northern part of this village. Another important update is coming from the territory of the village by the name of Basovka. Today, several pro-Russian resources reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians secured the village completely. So Basovka has fallen, and most likely the Russians will continue advancing further in the southern direction towards the settlement of Yunakivka. And summarizing everything, summarizing the roads of Russian attack, we can make a conclusion that most likely the Russians will try to create a secure zone at the first stage of this offensive operation. They will try to take under control everything that's located to the north of this red line, and the Russians are planning to complete this probably before the 20th of April or even earlier. Furthermore, according to neutral mappers, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the fortress along the border, and most likely from these positions the Russians are planning to move further in the western direction, trying to tighten the noose around the Ukrainian forces in the village of Yunakivka. So we can say that most likely we are entering the phase of the battle for the settlement by the name of Yunakivka. We continue receiving different updates and videos with the significant number of losses that Ukrainians suffered during the battle for Sudzha. The source reported that for the previous 7 months, the Ukrainians lost more than 1,000 vehicles of Western production mainly. Obviously, the losses were very huge, and these losses are not replaceable. The Ukrainians will be able to replace them, but it's required times, and the sources are saying that the ratio of losses between the Russians and the Ukrainians is 1-to-1, which means that the Russians will be able to replace the losses in the very near future because their production works 24 hours, 7 days a week, and the Ukrainians can rely just on the Western supplies. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Belgorod direction. The sources reported that Ukrainians managed to dig in deeper on the outskirts of the village of Demidovka, and every single night the Ukrainians make another attempt to attack the village of Demidovka from the south and from the southwest. As for the beginning of the 23rd of March, every single attempt carried out by the Ukrainians was repelled by the Russians. This night is going to be very interesting because we believe that before the negotiation process, before meeting talks in the Saudi Arabia, the Ukrainians will try to take under control this settlement and to raise their flag. This most likely will improve their negotiation positions, or the Ukrainians will try to take at least as one settlement anywhere with the purpose to improve their positions during the upcoming talks. The Russian sources continue publishing video how they can attacking and destroying Ukrainian vehicles along the border. Another cemetery for the Ukrainian vehicles was created in the Belgorod direction. The Ukrainians continue suffering losses, and if Ukrainians continue the same way, most likely in the very near future they will be completely out of vehicles and weapons in this area, and then the Russians will be able to attack without and to face no resistance from the Ukrainian side. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the northern Kupyansk direction. We have a lot of very important updates, and the most important are coming from the settlement of Kamenk and settlement of Topoli. Today the Ukrainian sources published very interesting article and very interesting changes on map. According to them, the Russians managed to cut several positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in pincers, and the Ukrainians also reported about the situation on the ground. The Ukrainians are saying that the situation here is very critical, and those units that are located in this area can't handle with the Russian offensives, and sooner or later, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, the armed forces of Ukraine from this area would be forced to fall back towards more reliable positions. This is very important foothold for the Russians. Currently, the Russians suffer significant problems in the area of Dvorichne. The Ukrainians counterattack, and as for now the Russians, after first months of success, the Russians are just losing the ground. They are forced to fall back. The problem is that the Russians can fight in the southern foothold just with the use of infantry. They can't bring vehicles in this to this bank of the river of Oskil, and the Ukrainians always counterattack with a significant number of vehicles. So this is the main problem. To start using vehicles, tanks and infantry fighting vehicles, the Russians need to improve their positions more, and currently this is the main task they're trying to complete. If the Russians are able to take everything inside of this red line, then they will be able to bring additional vehicles, tanks on this side of the river of Oskil, and then everything will go much more easier for the Russians. But as for now, just problems and very heavy clashes. According to different mappers, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over the village by the name of Zapadne, and the Ukrainians managed to restore control over some positions to the south of the village by the name of Sinkovka. So they're trying to counterattack in this area, and the Ukrainians try to counterattack here. And based on the geolocations that we got during the previous nights, the units of the 42nd Mechanized Brigade published video how they were attacking, bombing the Russian positions in the area of Dvorichne. We came to conclusion that most likely in the very near future, the Ukrainians will try to counterattack the positions of the armed force of the Russian Federation in the area of the village of Dvorichne itself, with the purpose to cut this direction in two. So we expect that tomorrow or maybe this upcoming night, the Ukrainians will counterattack in this area with only purpose to strengthen their negotiation position. As for the strengthening of the negotiation positions, we received very important video from the settlement by the name of Nadia. Today, pro-Ukrainian sources of the 3rd Assault Brigade published the video how they were counterattacking the Russians in the area of this small village, and the Ukrainians, as a result of counterattack, managed to restore control over this settlement. Probably this is the first settlement that was recaptured by the Ukrainians since the beginning of 2024. The Ukrainians made lots of attempts in the Pokrovsk direction, but the Russians managed to repel every single attack in that area. As for this direction, we believe that the Russians will counterattack, but as for now, before the negotiation process, the Ukrainians managed to strengthen their position. We are not saying that Nadia is something huge and something important, but you know that everything is good to strengthen your negotiation positions. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the area of the city of Chasiv Yar. The Russians, according to information we have, are about to begin assault operations towards the village by the name of Stupachki, and we see how exactly the Russians are planning to attack, and most likely the Russians will try to outflank this village from the south with the purpose to answer the village of Pritechina, which will allow the Russians to cut this territory in two. So we expect in the very near future a very powerful attack from the Russian forces exactly in this direction. If the Russians are able to establish complete control, let's say over this territory, let's add this territory on map, then this will lead to significant progress of the armored force of the Russian Federation, and this will allow the Russians to get as close as possible to the city of Konstantinovka itself. So this might be something like a breakthrough offensive operation from the Russian side, which is going to happen in the very near future. As for the city of Chasiv Yar, there are still very heavy clashes on the territory of the settlement, and the Russians are finishing the clearing operation. The Toretsk direction, the Russians continue offensive operation with the purpose to improve their positions and to increase the buffer zone between the city itself and the edge positions of the armored forces of Ukraine. The Russians continue and finishing improving their logistics. The Russians are bringing closer their forces, their headquarters. Of course, the Ukrainians control the situation, and today we got video how the Ukrainians destroyed another headquarters of the armored forces of the Russian Federation, the territory of the settlement, which means first of all that the Russians are getting closer and closer to the line of combat contact. As for now, and according to geolocations, we see that the current task of the Russians is to establish complete control over everything that is located inside of this red area. This is the first target for the Russians, which will allow the Russians to get as close as possible to the city of Konstantinovka and to begin probably the main battle of the spring and early summer campaign of 2025. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation in the city of Pokrovsk, where the Russians began bombing and attacking the southern outskirts of the settlement. After the Ukrainians were completely defeated on the territory of Shevchenko and Pishane, the Russians managed to defeat the Ukrainians and to force them to fall back. Now the Russians also are about to finish regrouping and about to bring additional reinforcements and artillery positions as close as possible to the city itself. And starting off today, we start receiving first videos how the Russians were bombing and attacking the citadel of the city of Pokrovsk, at least its southern part. As for now, the main target of the Russians is to reduce to ruins the first buildings in this area. These positions the Ukrainians use as machine gun positions, as FPV drone positions, as anti-tank positions. Only by ruining this part of the city of Pokrovsk will allow the Russians to carry out probably breakthrough operation and maybe to take several positions on the territory of the city itself. So we expect that in the very near future the Russians may try to test the Ukrainian defense with the purpose to establish complete control at least over this part of the city of Pokrovsk. This will allow the Russians to get another media victory and to probably to force Ukrainians to get in panic or something like this. If the Russians are able to take these territories, this is going to be a complete disaster for the Ukrainians and going to be very difficult for the Ukrainians to stabilize the situation. Maybe something like this the Russians are planning to, let's say, to complete in the very near future. As for the South Donetsk direction, we continue receiving videos from the city of Constantinople, from the town of Constantinople. Today we got video how the Ukrainians counterattacked, and as a result of counteroffensive, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions a little bit in the western part of the village, despite the fact that several weeks ago the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation confirmed complete control over this settlement. We still continue receiving updates from the most western part. We see that the Russians are not in a hurry to destroy Ukrainian forces and positions in this side. Maybe the Russians are regrouping, maybe they're waiting for additional reinforcements or additional reserves to come to this area with the purpose to begin a full-scale offensive. But as for now, we see that Ukrainians still have positions in this part of the settlement. As for the Zaporozhye direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the southern part of the settlement of Lapkova. This information was provided by pro-Russian resources, but other pro-Russian resources published video how the Russians were FPV droning the Ukrainians in the southern part of the same settlement, which means that most likely reports about Russian control over the village of Lapkova were just speculation. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.